The blood on Katherine Jensen's face was from a split lip, though some said later it came from the rock that grazed her temple, and as she stumbled down the main street of Westcliffe, Colorado in the autumn of 1882, skirts torn and bonnet hanging by a single ribbon, she swore she would never return to this God-forsaken place or forgive the people who had turned on her with such vicious speed. The schoolhouse stood behind her like a monument to her failure. Its windows now dark, even though children should have been reciting their multiplication tables, and the crowd that had gathered to witness her disgrace was already dispersing, their righteous anger satisfied now that they had driven out the woman they claimed had corrupted their youth with dangerous ideas and inappropriate conduct. Katherine had been in Westcliffe for only 8 months, arriving in February when the snow still clung to the Sangre de Cristo mountains, and the town desperately needed someone willing to teach their children for modest pay and even more modest accommodations. She had been grateful for the position then, a young woman of 23 with teaching credentials from a school back in Philadelphia and a desperate need to escape the suffocating expectations of her family and a broken engagement that had left her reputation in tatters. Now she understood that some things followed you no matter how far west you traveled, and that small towns could be just as cruel as big cities when they decided you did not belong. The lies had started small, whispers that she showed favoritism to certain students, that her teaching methods were unorthodox and potentially harmful. Then came the more serious accusations, spread primarily by Constance Hartley, the wife of the town's wealthiest rancher, and a woman who had opposed Katherine's hiring from the beginning. Constance claimed that Katherine had been seen in inappropriate circumstances with several of the older male students, that she dressed immodestly, that she encouraged the girls to question their parents and reject traditional values. None of it was true, but truth mattered little when reputation was at stake, and when Constance presented a torn piece of Katherine's shawl that had supposedly been found in the barn behind the mercantile where one of the 17-year-old boys worked, the town council had called an emergency meeting. Katherine had tried to defend herself, standing before a room full of stern-faced men who had already made up their minds, explaining that she had lost the shawl weeks ago and that the accusations were baseless, born from Constance's personal animosity and nothing more. But Constance had brought other women to testify, women who claimed they had seen suspicious behavior, heard inappropriate comments, witnessed Katherine behaving in ways unbecoming of a school teacher. The council had given her until sunset to leave town, and when Katherine had gone to the schoolhouse one final time to collect her few personal belongings, she had found a crowd waiting. They had jeered at her, called her vile names, accused her of being a temptress and a corrupter of innocence. Someone had thrown the first stone, and then others followed, small rocks that struck her arms and back as she tried to shield herself. She had run then, dignity abandoned in favor of survival, and had made it to the small boarding house where she rented a room only to find her trunk already packed and sitting on the front steps. Mrs. Donnelly, the boarding house owner, had at least had the decency to look ashamed as she told Katherine she could not shelter someone the whole town had turned against, that it was bad for business and her own reputation. Katherine had taken her trunk, though she had no idea where she would go, and had started walking toward the edge of town. The road stretched before her, dusty and lonely, leading down from the mountain valley toward destinations unknown. She had a little money saved, enough perhaps to reach Denver if she was careful, and from there she could decide what came next. The injustice of it all burned in her chest worse than the physical pain, the knowledge that she had done nothing wrong but had been punished anyway, driven out by lies and mob mentality while the real villains remained safe in their homes, satisfied with their cruelty. She was 2 miles outside of town, struggling with the weight of her trunk and fighting back tears of frustration and pain, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Katherine turned, fear spiking through her that some of the men had decided driving her out was not enough, that they wanted to humiliate her further or worse. But the rider who approached was alone, a tall figure on a dark horse, and as he drew closer she could see he was not one of the town council members or the angry husbands who had been part of the mob. He was younger, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair beneath a worn Stetson and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty from travel, and there was something in his expression that made Catherine's grip on her trunk handle loosen slightly. He reined in his horse a few feet away and sat looking at her for a long moment, his gaze taking in her torn dress, her bruised face, the trunk sitting in the middle of the road. "You are the teacher," he said finally, and it was not a question. His voice was deep and carried a hint of an accent Catherine could not quite place, something that suggested he had not been born speaking English. "I was the teacher," Catherine replied, lifting her chin despite the way her lip throbbed. "Until today." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion and walked toward her. Catherine took an instinctive step back, but he held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I am Asher Ross," he said. "I work the cattle up in the high meadows, do not come to town often, but I came down today to sell some horses and heard what happened." His jaw tightened. "Heard them bragging about it in the saloon, Constance Hartley holding court like she had done something noble instead of something shameful." "Then you know I have been accused of terrible things," Catherine said, her voice breaking slightly despite her efforts to remain composed, "that the whole town believes I am some kind of corrupting influence on their precious children. I know that Constance Hartley has been trying to get her sister installed as the teacher since before you arrived," Asher said quietly. "I know that her accusations always seem to come when she wants something, and that the truth tends to be the first casualty of her ambition." He looked at her trunk, then back at her face. "I also know that running you out of town with rocks and lies is wrong, no matter what anyone believes you did or did not do." Catherine felt something crack inside her chest, a small fissure in the armor of anger and hurt she had been building since the first stone struck her back. This stranger, this cowboy who barely came to town, was the first person all day to speak to her as if she were still a human being deserving of basic dignity. "Thank you for that," she managed, "but it does not change my situation. I have to keep moving, try to get far enough away that these lies do not follow me." Asher was quiet for a moment, studying her with eyes that were a startling shade of green against his tanned skin. "What if you did not run?" he said finally. "What if you stayed and faced them down, made them confront the truth of what they did?" Catherine laughed, a bitter sound. "Face them? They ran me out with violence. The town council has ordered me to leave. I have no home, no position, no one willing to stand with me. How exactly would you suggest I face them?" "Not alone," Asher said, and there was something in his voice that made Catherine's heart skip. "Let me help you. Come back with me to my ranch. Get cleaned up and rested. Tomorrow we will ride back into town together, and I will stand with you while you demand answers from the town council. Make them explain exactly what evidence they have beyond Constance Hartley's word and a convenient piece of fabric." "Why would you do that?" Catherine asked, suspicious now despite the kindness he had shown. "You do not know me. For all you know, the accusations could be true." Asher shook his head slowly. "I have lived in this territory for 8 years, worked these mountains and valleys, watched the way people treat each other when they think no one is looking. I know what truth looks like, and I know what mob justice looks like. This was mob justice, pure and simple." He paused, then added more softly, "And I know what it feels like to be judged unfairly because of lies someone else spread, to have your whole life upended because people believe the worst instead of asking for the truth." There was a story there. Catherine could hear it in his voice, see it in the shadows that crossed his face. She wanted to ask, but more than that, she wanted to stop feeling so utterly alone. The road ahead looked so long and lonely, and the prospect of facing more towns, more potential accusations, more running felt suddenly unbearable. "Your ranch," she said slowly. "Is it far?" "About an hour's ride north up in the high country where the meadows stay green most of the year," Asher replied. "I have a small cabin, nothing fancy, but it is clean and safe. My sister Molly lives there too, helps me with the horses. You would be properly chaperoned. No risk to your reputation beyond what has already been done." The mention of a sister made the decision easier. Catherine looked back toward Westcliffe, hidden now behind the curve of the mountain, then at Asher Ross with his weathered face and steady gaze. "All right," she said. surprised by her own courage. "I will come to your ranch, but tomorrow when we ride back into town, I need you to understand that it might not change anything. The council might stand by their decision. The people might still believe the lies." "Then at least you will have tried," Asher said. "At least you will not spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have fought back." He moved to her trunk and lifted it easily, securing it to his horse with practiced efficiency. Then he turned back to her. "You can ride with me. It will be faster than walking, and that lip needs tending." Katherine allowed him to help her mount, settling side saddle behind him with her arms awkwardly holding onto his waist. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, the strength in his shoulders as he guided the horse away from the main road and onto a smaller trail that led up into the mountains. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic clopping of hooves and the whisper of wind through the pine trees. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and distant snow, and despite everything that had happened, Katherine felt some of the tension begin to leave her shoulders. "You said you know what it is like to be judged unfairly," she said finally, breaking the silence. "What happened to you?" Asher was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My father was Scots-Irish. My mother was Ute. In this territory, that makes you suspect to both sides. The white ranchers think you might be passing information to the tribes. The tribes think you have betrayed your heritage by living in the white man's world. I spent my childhood being called half-breed, being told I did not belong anywhere." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Katherine could hear the old pain beneath the words. "When I was 18, there was trouble between some ranchers and a Ute hunting party. Cattle went missing, and because I was the easiest target, I was accused of helping steal them. Turned out later it was the rancher's own son selling the cattle to a buyer 2 towns over and pocketing the money. But before the truth came out, I was nearly hanged." Katherine's arms tightened involuntarily around his waist. "That is horrible. It taught me that people will believe what they want to believe, especially if it confirms what they already think they know," Asher said. "But it also taught me that the truth matters, even when it is hard to prove, even when it takes time to come out. Eventually the son got drunk and bragged about what he had done, and the truth could not be hidden anymore. I was cleared. But by then I had already decided I was done trying to live in town, done trying to make people accept me. So I took my savings, bought some land up in the high country where no one bothers me, and built a life there." "Sounds lonely?" Katherine said softly. "It was for a while," Asher admitted. "Then Molly came to live with me 3 years ago after our mother passed. She is good company, helps with the horses, does not mind the isolation the way some people might. We have built something good up there, something that belongs to us and cannot be taken away by other people's opinions." They crested a rise, and Katherine could see the cabin in the distance, nestled in a small valley with mountains rising on 3 sides. It was indeed small but well built, with smoke rising from the chimney, and a large corral where several horses grazed. As they approached, the cabin door opened and a young woman emerged, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. She was perhaps 20, with long dark hair in a braid and her brother's same striking green eyes. "Asher?" she called. "Who is that with you?" "The teacher from Westcliffe," Asher called back, as he reined in his horse near the corral. "Miss Katherine Jensen. She needs our help." Molly's expression shifted from curiosity to understanding, and Katherine realized that news traveled fast even to isolated ranches. "I heard what they did," Molly said as Asher dismounted and helped Katherine down. "Constance Hartley came through here this morning on her way to visit that awful cousin of hers, bragging about how she had exposed a corrupting influence in their midst." Her lip curled in disgust. "I knew right then it was all lies. Constance cannot stand any woman who might be smarter or more respected than her." "Miss Jensen will be staying with us tonight," Asher said, untying the trunk. "Tomorrow I'm going to ride back to town with her and make the council explain their evidence." Molly's eyes widened. Then a fierce smile crossed her face. "Good. It is about time someone stood up to that woman and her cronies." She turned to Katherine, her expression softening. "Come inside. Let me get some water heated so we can clean those cuts, and then you can rest. You look exhausted." Katherine was exhausted, bone-deep tired in a way that went beyond physical exertion. She let Molly lead her inside the cabin, which was indeed small but surprisingly comfortable. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with benches, and a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove. 2 doors led to what Katherine assumed were bedrooms. The whole space was clean and well organized, with personal touches that spoke of people who took pride in their home despite its rustic simplicity. Molly settled Katherine at the table and began efficiently heating water and gathering clean cloths. "I am sorry about what happened to you," she said as she worked. "This territory can be hard on women, especially women who do not fit into the neat little boxes people want to put them in. Teachers are supposed to be prim and proper and never question anything, never challenge anyone. The moment you step outside those lines, people get nervous." "I did not even step outside the lines," Katherine said wearily. "I just taught the students what they needed to learn, encouraged them to think critically, to ask questions. I never did anything inappropriate, never acted in any way that could be genuinely construed as improper. Constance Hartley simply decided she did not like me, and she is powerful enough in that town that her dislike was enough to destroy me." "Constance is used to getting her way," Molly agreed, bringing the water and cloths to the table. "Her husband owns the biggest ranch in the valley, which means she thinks she owns the people too." She began gently cleaning the cut on Katherine's lip, her touch surprisingly gentle. "But Asher is right to help you fight back. People like Constance only have power because everyone else is too afraid to challenge them." Asher came back inside, having settled his horse, and brought Katherine's trunk into the cabin. "Molly, can Miss Jensen use your room tonight? I will sleep out in the barn." "You will do no such thing," Molly said firmly. "It is too cold at night now. I will sleep in my room. Miss Jensen can have yours, and you can sleep out here by the fire like you do half the time anyway when you are working on your saddles." "Please call me Katherine," Katherine said, wincing as Molly touched a particularly tender spot. "After everything that has happened today, formality seems almost absurd." Over the next hour, as Molly tended her injuries and the sun set beyond the mountains, Katherine found herself relaxing in a way she had not been able to in months, maybe longer. Asher prepared a simple dinner of salt pork, beans, and fresh bread that Molly had baked that morning, and the 3 of them ate together while Katherine told them the full story of what had happened. She explained about the initial small rumors, how they had grown and morphed into more serious accusations, how she had been powerless to stop the spread of lies. She told them about the meeting with the town council, about the women Constance had brought to testify against her, about the mob that had gathered at the schoolhouse. "Did any of the parents whose children you actually taught speak up for you?" Asher asked, his expression dark. Katherine shook her head. "A few looked uncomfortable, like maybe they did not entirely believe the accusations, but no one was willing to go against Constance publicly. The Hartley Ranch employs half the men in town at various times throughout the year. Cross Constance, and you risk your livelihood." "That is not justice," Molly said fiercely. "That is tyranny." "That is reality," Katherine replied sadly, "and that is why I am not sure going back tomorrow will accomplish anything. Asher, I appreciate your desire to help, but I do not want you to make yourself a target on my behalf. You have built a good life here. Why risk it for a stranger?" Asher met her eyes across the table, and Katherine felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "Because I have spent too many years watching people get away with cruelty and injustice, and I am tired of it. And because you are not a stranger anymore." The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost glittering on the grass outside the cabin. Katherine woke in Asher's small bedroom, disoriented for a moment before memory crashed back. She could hear voices from the main room, Asher and Molly talking quietly as they prepared breakfast. For a moment she stayed where she was, wrapped in borrowed blankets that smelled faintly of sage and leather, and let herself imagine what it would be like to stay here, to never go back to Westcliffe or face the people who had wronged her. But that was cowardice, and Katherine Jensen had not traveled halfway across the country to become a coward. She dressed in her least damaged dress, one that Molly had cleaned and mended the night before, and braided her hair neatly. Her face was bruised, the cut on her lips still visible, but she would not hide the evidence of what had been done to her. Let the town council see what their judgment had wrought. She emerged from the bedroom to find Asher and Molly waiting, and Molly immediately came forward with a cup of hot coffee. "I wish I could go with you," Molly said, "but Asher thinks it is better if it is just the two of you, less threatening, more likely to get people to actually listen." "Your brother is probably right," Katherine said, though she would have welcomed Molly's fierce support. She turned to Asher, who was checking his saddlebags with methodical care. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," Asher said. He looked up at her, and Katherine was struck again by the steadiness in his gaze, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. "We will ride in, go straight to the town council, and demand that they provide actual evidence for their accusations. If they cannot, we demand that they reinstate your position and make a public statement clearing your name. And if they refuse, then we make it clear that their injustice will not go unchallenged, that there are people willing to stand up for what is right even when it is difficult." Asher came closer, and Katherine caught her breath at his nearness. "Katherine, I know we just met, and I know this is not my fight by any traditional measure, but I meant what I said yesterday. I'm tired of watching bullies win because decent people are too afraid to confront them." They saddled up shortly after, Katherine riding behind Asher again because she did not have her own horse and because, she admitted to herself, she took comfort in his solid presence. The ride back to Westcliffe took just over an hour, the trail winding down from the high country into the valley where the town sat. As they drew closer, Katherine felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. Part of her still could not believe she was doing this, riding back into the place that had violently rejected her with nothing but the support of a cowboy she had known for barely a day. They reached the main street just before noon, when the town was busiest. Asher rode slowly down the center of the dusty road, making no effort to hide their arrival. Katherine could see heads turning, people stopping their conversations to stare. Word spread quickly, rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. By the time Asher reined in his horse in front of the building that housed the town council's meeting room, a crowd had begun to gather. Asher dismounted first, then helped Katherine down with a hand that was steady and warm. "Stay close to me," he murmured. "Do not let them intimidate you." They walked together toward the council building, and the crowd parted reluctantly. Katherine could hear the whispers, the shocked exclamations that she had dared to return. Then a voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and outraged. "What is the meaning of this?" That woman was ordered to leave town. Constance Hartley pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with anger. She was a handsome woman in her early 40s, dressed expensively in a way that reminded everyone of her wealth and status. Her eyes fixed on Katherine with undisguised hostility, then shifted to Asher with confusion and growing anger. "Asher Ross, what are you doing? This woman is a corrupter of children, a threat to decent society. This woman is a teacher who was driven out based on lies and innuendo," Asher said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the increasingly silent crowd. "And I am here to make sure she gets a fair hearing, something she should have received the first time." "She had her hearing," Constance snapped. "The council reviewed the evidence and made their decision." "What evidence?" Katherine asked, finding her voice despite the fear hammering in her chest. "A piece of my shawl that I lost weeks ago? Testimony from women who admitted they never actually witnessed me doing anything inappropriate, only that they had heard rumors? That is not evidence, Mrs. Hartley. That is gossip and hearsay." "How dare you?" Constance began, but Asher interrupted her. "Where is the town council? Miss Jensen has the right to face her accusers properly, to demand specific evidence rather than vague accusations." "The council does not meet except by appointment," Constance said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. The crowd was listening now, and Katherine could see uncertainty on some faces, people beginning to question the narrative they had been fed. "Then let us make an appointment right now," Asher said. "Unless the council is afraid to confront Miss Jensen when she has someone standing with her." That challenge could not go unanswered in a town like Westcliffe, where pride and reputation mattered so much. Within 15 minutes, the council members had been summoned and were gathering in their meeting room. There were 5 of them. Mayor Robert Henderson, a graying man in his 50s, Samuel Cooper, who ran the general store, Thomas Wheeler, who owned the livery, Frank Morrison, a prosperous farmer, and Gerald Hartley, Constance's husband. Catherine's heart sank when she saw Gerald sitting in his usual seat, knowing that he would never go against his wife's wishes. The council members looked uncomfortable as Katherine and Asher entered the room, Constance following close behind. Several of the men avoided Catherine's eyes while Gerald glared at her with open hostility. Mayor Henderson cleared his throat. "Miss Jensen, you were ordered to leave town. Your return is in direct violation of the council's ruling." "The council's ruling was unjust," Katherine said, pleased that her voice did not shake. "I was accused of serious misconduct, but never given the opportunity to properly defend myself or examine the evidence against me. I was never allowed to question my accusers or present witnesses on my own behalf." "The evidence was clear enough," Gerald Hartley said dismissively. "Multiple witnesses testified to your inappropriate behavior." "What witnesses?" Asher asked, his tone sharp. "I would like their names and specific statements, please." The council members shifted uncomfortably. Samuel Cooper, who had always seemed like a decent man, finally spoke up. "Mrs. Hartley brought 3 women who testified that they had concerns about Miss Jensen's conduct. Mrs. Pemberton said she had heard that Miss Jensen encouraged her daughter to question her father's authority. Mrs. Walker said she had seen Miss Jensen walking alone near the creek at dusk, which seemed suspicious. And Mrs. Reynolds said that some of the older boys seemed overly interested in visiting the schoolhouse." "None of that is evidence of misconduct," Katherine said, unable to keep the frustration from her voice. "I encourage all my students to think critically, including questioning authority when appropriate. That is part of education. I walked near the creek because it is beautiful and peaceful, and I was always back before full dark. And if older boys were visiting the schoolhouse frequently, perhaps it is because they were genuinely interested in learning." "There was also the matter of your shawl being found in a compromising location," Gerald added with a sneer. "A shawl I had lost weeks before it was supposedly found," Katherine shot back. "Anyone could have placed it there deliberately to create false evidence. Are you accusing my wife of fabricating evidence?" Gerald half rose from his seat, his face reddening. "I am saying that a piece of fabric is not proof of anything except that fabric can be moved from one place to another," Katherine replied, meeting his glare steadily. "And I am saying that I deserve better than to have my career and reputation destroyed based on such flimsy pretexts." "The girl has a point," Thomas Wheeler said slowly. "We did move pretty fast on this whole thing. Maybe we should have been more thorough." "She is a corrupting influence," Constance interjected from where she stood near the door. "The longer she stayed, the more damage she would have done to our children's morals." "What exactly did I do that was so corrupting?" Katherine demanded, turning to face the older woman. "I taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and science. I maintained discipline in the classroom. I never touched a student inappropriately or said anything that could genuinely be considered immoral. The only thing I did that you disapproved of was refuse to defer to you on matters of curriculum and teaching methods." The room went silent. Constance's face flushed an angry red. "How dare you suggest that I would fabricate accusations out of personal pique? How dare you destroy an innocent woman's life because she would not let you control her?" Asher said quietly, and there was steel in his voice now. "Everyone in this room knows that you wanted your sister to have the teaching position. Everyone knows that you have been opposed to Miss Jensen from the beginning, and everyone knows that you are used to getting your way no matter who gets hurt in the process." "This is outrageous," Gerald blustered, but several of the other council members were looking thoughtful now, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. Mayor Henderson held up a hand for silence. "Perhaps we did act hastily," he said slowly. "Perhaps we should have required more concrete evidence before taking such drastic action." He looked at Katherine, and she could see genuine regret in his eyes. "Miss Jensen, I apologize for the way you were treated. The council should have been more thorough in our investigation. An apology means nothing without action, Asher said. Miss Jensen's reputation has been damaged, possibly permanently. She was physically assaulted and driven out of town. Words will not repair that harm. What would you have us do? Samuel Cooper asked, and he sounded genuinely curious rather than defensive. Reinstate Miss Jensen as the teacher with a public statement acknowledging that the accusations against her were unfounded, Asher said. Provide her with compensation for her suffering and the damage to her belongings, and make it clear that false accusations will not be tolerated in this town. Gerald Hartley stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We will not be bullied into reversing a legitimate decision just because some half-breed cowboy rides in playing hero. The room went absolutely silent. Katherine felt Asher go rigid beside her, saw his jaw tighten. But when he spoke, his voice was perfectly controlled. My heritage has nothing to do with the facts of this case, Mr. Hartley. Though I appreciate you demonstrating the kind of prejudice and poor judgment that led to Miss Jensen's unjust treatment in the first place. Thomas Wheeler stood up slowly. Gerald, that was uncalled for. Asher's heritage does not make him wrong about this situation. He looked at the other council members. I move that we reinstate Miss Jensen as teacher, pending a proper investigation into the accusations against her. If that investigation finds no concrete evidence of wrongdoing, we issue a public apology and compensate her for her troubles. Seconded, Samuel Cooper said immediately. This is insane, Gerald protested, but Mayor Henderson was already calling for a vote. When the hands went up, 4 of the 5 council members voted in favor of the motion. Only Gerald voted against it, his face dark with fury. The motion passes, Mayor Henderson said. Miss Jensen, you are reinstated as Westcliffe's teacher effective immediately. We will conduct a thorough investigation, interviewing students and parents individually and in private. If that investigation clears you, as I suspect it will, we will make a public statement to that effect. He paused. I truly am sorry for what happened to you. The council failed in its duty to ensure justice, and for that I take personal responsibility. Katherine felt tears prickling at her eyes, but she blinked them back. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate your willingness to reconsider. She looked at the other council members, then let her gaze rest on Gerald and Constance. I hope that in the future, accusations will be properly investigated before action is taken. As they left the council building, Katherine felt almost lightheaded with relief and residual fear. A crowd still waited outside, and the news of the council's decision was already spreading. She could see shock on many faces, satisfaction on others, and fury on Constance's as the older woman pushed past them and stalked away, her husband following. Asher kept a protective hand on Katherine's elbow, guiding her through the crowd toward where his horse waited. That was incredible, Katherine said once they were away from the densest part of the crowd. I cannot believe they actually voted to reinstate me. Some of those men still have consciences, Asher replied. They knew what happened was wrong, even if they were too afraid of the Hartleys to speak up initially. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. But Katherine, you should know that this is not over. Constance Hartley is not the type to accept defeat gracefully. She will try to undermine you, spread more rumors, make your life difficult. I know, Katherine said, but at least now I have a chance to fight back properly. At least now the truth has a chance to come out. She twisted slightly to look back at him. Thank you, Asher. I would never have had the courage to do this alone. You have plenty of courage, Asher said, and there was warmth in his voice that made Katherine's heart skip. You just needed someone to stand with you while you found it again. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, and when they arrived, Molly came running out of the cabin, her face alight with hope. Well, what happened? Katherine told her everything, from the confrontation with Constance to the council's vote to reinstate her. Molly let out a whoop of joy and hugged Katherine fiercely. I knew it. I knew that if you stood up to them, they would have to back down. It is not a complete victory yet, Katherine cautioned. There still has to be an investigation, and I will have to go back to teaching knowing that some people still believe the lies. It will be difficult. But you will not be doing it alone, Molly said firmly. Asher and I will support you. And once the investigation clears you, which it will, people will have to accept the truth. Over the following weeks, Katherine moved back into her room at Mrs. Donnelly's boarding house, though the atmosphere was strained at first. She returned to the schoolhouse, facing down the curious and sometimes hostile stares of parents as they brought their children. The investigation proceeded slowly but thoroughly, with Mayor Henderson himself conducting many of the interviews. Katherine focused on her teaching, working harder than ever to prove that she deserved the position and the town's trust. Asher came to town more frequently than he had before, always finding reasons to stop by the schoolhouse or encounter Katherine on the street. At first, Katherine thought he was simply checking to make sure she was safe, protecting her from potential retaliation by the Hartleys. But as the days turned into weeks, she began to realize that his interest went deeper than simple chivalry. He would bring her small gifts, wildflowers from the high meadows, or a book he thought she might enjoy. They would talk for hours when he visited, conversations that ranged from serious discussions about the territory's future to light-hearted debates about literature and philosophy. Katherine found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. She had been engaged once before, back in Philadelphia, to a man who had seemed perfect on the surface but who had ultimately wanted her to be something she was not. That relationship had ended badly, with her former fiancé spreading rumors about her character when she broke the engagement. It was part of what had driven her west. The need to escape the wreckage of that failed relationship and the judgment of people who thought a woman who broke an engagement must be flawed somehow. But Asher was different from her former fiancé in every way. He never tried to change her or diminish her intelligence. He listened when she spoke, as if her words actually mattered, and he treated her as an equal rather than as something decorative to be admired and controlled. With him, Katherine felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in years. One evening in late October, Asher invited Katherine to ride out to the ranch for dinner. The investigation was nearly complete, and Mayor Henderson had indicated privately that it would clear her of all accusations. Katherine accepted the invitation eagerly, relieved to escape the still somewhat tense atmosphere of town for an evening. Molly greeted her with warm enthusiasm, and the three of them shared a meal of venison stew and fresh bread while the autumn wind whistled outside the cabin windows. After dinner, Asher asked if Katherine would like to see the horses, and she agreed. They walked out to the corral together, the night air crisp and cold, stars blazing in the dark sky. The horses came to greet them, curious and gentle, and Asher showed Katherine his favorite, a dark mare with intelligent eyes. "Her name is Luna," Asher said, stroking the mare's nose. "I have had her since she was a foal. Best horse I have ever owned, smart and sure-footed." "She is beautiful," Katherine said, reaching out tentatively to touch the mare's neck. The horse whickered softly, accepting the attention. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sounds the quiet breathing of the horses and the distant cry of an owl. Then Asher said, "Katherine, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Katherine replied, turning to face him. "Why did you really come west?" Asher asked. "I know you said you needed a teaching position, but there must have been opportunities back east that would have been easier, more comfortable." Katherine was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to tell him. But Asher had been honest with her about his own past, and she found she wanted to be equally honest with him. "I was engaged," she said finally, "to a man from a good family, someone my parents approved of. It seemed perfect on the surface, but the longer we were engaged, the more I realized that he did not actually want to marry me. He wanted to marry the version of me that he had created in his head, the quiet, obedient woman who would run his household and never challenge him or have thoughts of her own." "So you broke the engagement," Asher said. "I did, and he did not take it well. He told everyone who would listen that I was cold and unnatural, that I cared more about books and ideas than about being a proper woman. My reputation was damaged enough that finding another position in Philadelphia became nearly impossible. So when I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Colorado, I applied. I thought a fresh start in a new place would let me leave all that behind." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out some things follow you no matter how far you run. Or maybe you just had bad luck to run into someone like Constance Hartley, Asher said. He moved closer, and Catherine's breath caught as she looked up at him. Katherine, what happened to you in Philadelphia and what happened here in Westcliffe? None of that was your fault. You did nothing wrong except refuse to be diminished by people who could not handle your strength. Sometimes strength feels more like stubbornness, Katherine said softly. Sometimes I wonder if I make my own life harder by refusing to just go along. Just accept what people expect of me. If you did that, you would not be you, Asher said, and I happen to think you're pretty remarkable exactly as you are. The look in his eyes made Catherine's heart race. Asher, she whispered, not sure what she was asking for. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and gently cupped her face with his hand. His palm was warm and calloused, his touch infinitely gentle. Tell me to stop if you do not want this, he murmured. Instead of answering with words, Katherine rose on her toes and kissed him. It was tentative at first, uncertain, but then Asher's arms came around her and pulled her close, and the kiss deepened into something that made Katherine forget the cold night air and her past hurts and everything except the feeling of being held by this man who had stood by her when no one else would. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Asher rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that since the first day I saw you standing on that road, bruised and angry and refusing to be broken. I have wanted you to, Katherine admitted, but I was afraid of being hurt again, afraid of ruining the friendship we had built, afraid of so many things. We do not have to be afraid anymore, Asher said, not of each other at least. I cannot promise that life will be easy or that there will not be challenges, but I can promise that I will always stand with you, always fight for you, always see you for who you really are. They stood there in the starlight holding each other, and Katherine felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness that she had never experienced before. This man, this place, this moment, it all felt like coming home in a way that nowhere else ever had. The investigation concluded 2 weeks later with a complete exoneration. Mayor Henderson called a town meeting and publicly announced that the accusations against Katherine had been thoroughly investigated and found to be without merit. He apologized on behalf of the town council for the injustice done to her and announced that Katherine would receive 3 months' additional salary as compensation for her suffering. Constance Hartley was conspicuously absent from the meeting, and Katherine heard later that she had left to visit relatives back east, perhaps to escape the social consequences of her false accusations being exposed. With her name cleared and her position secure, Katherine threw herself into teaching with renewed energy. The students responded to her enthusiasm, and even the parents who had been most suspicious began to grudgingly admit that their children were learning and thriving under her instruction. She started an evening reading group for some of the older students and townspeople interested in literature, and it quickly became a popular gathering. Slowly but surely, Katherine was building a place for herself in Westcliffe, a real home rather than just a position she held tenuously. Through it all, her relationship with Asher deepened and grew. He courted her properly with flowers and evening rides and long conversations that lasted until the stars came out. Molly enthusiastically supported the relationship, often inviting Katherine to the ranch for dinners and overnight stays. The three of them became a kind of family bound together by affection and shared values rather than just blood. Winter came to the Sangre de Cristo Mountains with howling winds and heavy snow. On a particularly cold evening in January of 1883, Katherine was staying at the ranch because the road back to town had become impassable. She was reading by the fire while Molly mended clothes and Asher worked on repairing a saddle. It was a domestic scene, peaceful and comfortable, and Katherine felt a wave of contentment wash over her. "What are you smiling about?" Molly asked, noticing Katherine's expression. "Just thinking about how different my life is now from a year ago," Katherine said. "This time last year I was still in Philadelphia, still engaged to a man who made me feel small, still living a life that did not fit me. Now I am here, teaching in a town where people are starting to accept me, surrounded by people I care about deeply." She looked at Asher, who had looked up from his work to watch her. "It has been the hardest year of my life in many ways, but also the best." Asher set down his tools and came to sit beside her. "Katherine, there is something I have been wanting to ask you, but I have been waiting for the right moment." Katherine's heart began to race. "What is it?" "Marry me," Asher said simply. "Not because you need protection or because I rescued you or any of those storybook reasons. Marry me because I love you, because I want to spend the rest of my life with you, because I cannot imagine my future without you in it." Tears sprang to Katherine's eyes, but they were tears of joy this time. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Asher Ross. You gave me back my courage when I thought I had lost it. You stood by me when no one else would. But more than that, you see me for who I really am and love me anyway." "Not anyway," Asher corrected gently, pulling her into his arms. "Because of who you are, not in spite of it." Molly let out a joyful cry and rushed over to hug them both. "Finally!" "I have been waiting for weeks for you to ask her. I was starting to think I would have to lock you two in a barn until you figured it out." They were married in March of 1883, on a day when the snow was finally melting and the first hints of spring were appearing in the high meadows. The ceremony took place in Westcliffe's small church, with most of the town attending. Mayor Henderson gave Katherine away, a gesture that felt both appropriate and healing given the role he had played in clearing her name. Molly stood up as Katherine's attendant, beaming with pride and happiness. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with Katherine and Asher exchanging vows they had written themselves, promises to stand together through whatever challenges came, to honor each other's strengths and support each other's dreams. After the wedding, there was a celebration at the town hall with music and dancing and food that the whole community had contributed to. Even some of the families who had been most suspicious of Katherine came to wish them well, and Katherine felt the last vestiges of the pain from her ordeal finally beginning to heal. Constance Hartley had not returned from back east, and her husband had become notably quieter and less prominent in town affairs, which everyone agreed was an improvement. Katherine and Asher made their home at the ranch, with Molly staying on to help with the horses and the household. Katherine continued teaching, though she now had to ride down from the high country several times a week. The town council built a small apartment attached to the schoolhouse where she could stay during the week when the weather made the daily ride impractical, but she always returned to the ranch on weekends, eager to be home with Asher and Molly. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both productive and deeply satisfying. Katherine's students thrived under her instruction, and several of them went on to attend the universities back east, something almost unheard of for students from such a small mountain town. Asher's horse breeding operation grew and prospered, with buyers coming from as far as Denver to purchase his well-trained animals. Molly met a young man named Daniel who worked at the sawmill, and after a year of courtship, they were married in a ceremony that Katherine helped organize. In the spring of 1884, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both her and Asher with joy and a little fear, aware of the risks that childbirth posed, especially in such a remote location. But Katherine was healthy and strong, and when their son was born on a crisp October morning, the delivery was mercifully quick and without complications. They named him Matthew, and he had his father's green eyes and his mother's determined spirit from the very beginning. Watching Asher hold their son for the first time, Katherine felt her heart overflow with love and gratitude. This man had saved her in so many ways, not by sweeping in and solving all her problems, but by standing beside her and giving her the strength to save herself. Together they had built something beautiful out of pain and injustice, a family and a life that belonged entirely to them. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Sarah, who had Katherine's blonde hair and Asher's stubborn independence. The ranch house had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Asher built a beautiful addition with large windows that looked out over the mountain meadows Katherine had come to love. She continued teaching until Sarah was born, then took a few years off to focus on her young children, though she never stopped learning and reading and discussing ideas with anyone who would engage with her. When Matthew was 4 and Sarah 2, Katherine started teaching again, this time holding classes at the ranch for children whose families lived in the high country too far from town to make daily trips practical. It was a small school, never more than 8 or 10 students, but Katherine poured the same energy and passion into it that she had given to her Westcliffe classroom. The children flourished under her instruction, and word spread of the exceptional teacher in the mountains who welcomed any child willing to learn regardless of their family's circumstances. As the years passed, Katherine and Asher became pillars of the community in their own quiet way. They were known for their fairness, their willingness to help neighbors in need, and their dedication to making sure the next generation had opportunities to build good lives. The story of how they met, how Asher had ridden out to bring Katherine back and stood with her against injustice, became something of a local legend, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy, but always with the core truth intact, that love and justice were worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. Molly and Daniel had 3 children of their own, and built a home on land adjacent to Asher and Katherine's ranch. The 2 families were constantly in and out of each other's homes, the children growing up more like siblings than cousins. On summer evenings, they would gather on the porch of the main ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains while the children played and the adults talked about everything and nothing. During one such evening, when Katherine was 38 and they had been married 15 years, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Matthew was 14 now, already showing his father's skill with horses and his mother's love of learning. Sarah at 12 was fierce and independent, determined to become a doctor despite the obstacles that would face a woman with such ambitions. They had added a 3rd child to their family 5 years ago, another boy they named Thomas, who was curious about everything and drove his older siblings crazy with his constant questions. "What are you thinking about?" Asher asked, settling into the chair beside her and taking her hand. "Just how strange life is," Katherine said, "how one moment can change everything. If you had not ridden out that day, if you had not been willing to stand with me, I would be somewhere else entirely right now. Probably teaching in some other small town, still running from my past, still afraid to trust anyone." "Or maybe you would have found your courage anyway," Asher suggested. "I like to think I helped, but Katherine, you have always had strength in you. You just needed the right circumstances to let it out." "We helped each other," Katherine said firmly. "You gave me courage, and I gave you a reason to engage with the town again, to be part of the community instead of hiding away in the mountains." "Best trade I ever made," Asher said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children play in the fading light. Molly and Daniel were heading home, rounding up their own brood with promises of seeing everyone again soon. The mountains stood eternal and beautiful around them, the same peaks that had witnessed Katherine's lowest moment and her greatest triumphs. "Do you ever regret it?" Asher asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of going back east? Living this life instead of something easier?" Katherine looked at him in genuine surprise. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I am meant to be, exactly who I am meant to be with. Everything I went through, all the pain and injustice, it brought me here to you and to this life. I would not change any of it." "Not even the part where you got chased out of town with stones?" Asher asked, a hint of humor in his voice despite the serious subject. "Especially not that part," Katherine said, "because that is when you rode into my life and changed everything." She leaned over and kissed him softly. "You are my hero, Asher Ross. Not because you saved me, but because you stood with me while I saved myself." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Katherine called the children in for bed. There was the usual chaos of getting everyone settled, stories read and prayers said and kisses distributed. When the house was finally quiet, Katherine and Asher stood together in their bedroom, the window open to the cool mountain air. "I love you," Asher said, pulling her close. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the years we have left." "I love you too," Katherine replied, resting her head on his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you for being brave enough to ride out and bring me back, for facing down the whole town when they wanted me gone. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else just saw the lies. Thank you for being worth riding out for, Asher murmured against her hair. For being strong enough to fight back, smart enough to demand justice, and brave enough to love again after being hurt. They held each other as night fell completely over the ranch, two people who had found each other in the midst of injustice and built something beautiful together. Outside, the mountains stood guard over their valley home, and in the distance a coyote howled its lonely song to the moon. But inside the ranch house, there was only warmth and love, and the deep contentment of two souls who had finally found where they belonged. The years continued to roll past like the seasons, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Matthew grew into a fine young man who combined his father's skill with horses and his mother's intellectual curiosity in ways that made both parents proud. He eventually attended university in Denver, studying veterinary medicine, before returning to the high country to establish a practice that served ranchers throughout the valley. Sarah achieved her dream of becoming a doctor, though it required her to fight against prejudice and discrimination that made Katherine's own struggles seem minor by comparison. But Sarah had inherited her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength, and she persevered until she earned her medical degree and opened a practice in Westcliffe that served the community for decades. Thomas turned out to have a gift for teaching that mirrored his mother's, and he eventually took over Katherine's small mountain school, expanding it and developing teaching methods that attracted attention from educators across the territory. Katherine watched her children build their own lives with the same fierce pride she had once brought to her teaching, knowing that she and Asher had given them the foundation they needed to face the world with courage and integrity. When Colorado achieved statehood in 1876, it had already been accomplished by the time of their marriage, but they celebrated along with the rest of the territory when their community continued to grow and prosper in the following decades. Westcliffe remained a small town, but it developed a reputation for progressive values and excellent schools, a legacy that Katherine and others like her had helped to build through their determination to provide quality education regardless of obstacles. As Katherine and Asher grew older together, they developed the kind of deep partnership that only comes from weathering storms together and coming out stronger on the other side. They knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, could communicate volumes with a single look, and found joy in the simple moments of daily life together. Working side by side in the garden Asher had built for Katherine, riding through the mountain meadows on cool summer mornings, sitting by the fire on winter evenings reading to each other, these were the moments that made up a life well lived. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Matthew and his wife had given them 2 grandchildren. Sarah had 1 daughter who was already showing signs of inheriting the family's stubborn intelligence, and Thomas had recently become engaged to a young woman who taught at the school in town. As Katherine looked around at the faces of the family she and Asher had created, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the path her life had taken. That evening, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet again, Asher led Katherine out to the same spot where he had first kissed her all those years ago. The corral was empty now, the horses bedded down for the night, but the stars overhead were just as bright as they had been that autumn evening when they had first admitted their feelings for each other. "Do you remember standing here with me that first time?" Asher asked, his arm around Katherine's waist. "Every detail," Katherine said. "I remember being terrified and exhilarated all at once. Terrified because I had been hurt before and did not want to risk my heart again. Exhilarated because even then I knew you were someone special, someone worth taking that risk for." "I knew that night that I would marry you," Asher confessed. "I knew that you were the woman I had been waiting for without even realizing I was waiting. Strong and smart and brave, refusing to be diminished by people who could not handle your strength." "We have built a good life together," Katherine said softly. "Better than I ever imagined possible when I was standing on that road with my trunk, thinking my life was over." "It was just beginning," Asher corrected. "We were just beginning." They stood together under the stars, 2 people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had fought for their love and their dignity and built something that would endure long after they were gone. In their children and grandchildren, in the students Katherine had taught and the horses Asher had bred, in the community they had helped to shape, their legacy would continue. The years continued to pass with the steady inevitability of seasons changing. Katherine taught until she was 65, finally retiring when her body began to protest the long rides down from the mountain ranch. By then, Thomas had fully taken over the school and was doing such excellent work that parents were moving to the area specifically to have their children educated there. Asher continued working with his horses until he was 70, gradually turning over the more physically demanding work to Matthew and his sons while he focused on training and gentling the young animals. They grew old together with grace and humor, their love deepening rather than diminishing with age. The physical passion of their early years mellowed into something equally powerful, a bone-deep knowledge of each other that needed no words. They developed a routine of morning coffee on the porch regardless of weather, evening walks through the meadows when Katherine's joints allowed, and reading aloud to each other before bed from whatever book had captured their interest. When they had been married 40 years, Katherine woke one morning to find Asher watching her with the same look of wonder he had worn on their wedding day. "What?" she asked, smiling at his expression. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," Asher said. "How lucky I was to be riding into Westcliffe that particular day, to hear what had happened to you, to have the courage to do something about it." "I am the lucky one," Katherine countered. "You changed my life, Asher. You gave me back my courage and my hope and taught me that not all men were like my former fiancé. You showed me that love could be a partnership of equals, that strength could be gentle and gentleness could be strong." "We taught each other," Asher said, leaning over to kiss her gently. "That is what love is, I think. Teaching each other how to be better, how to be braver, how to build something together that neither of us could have built alone." They celebrated that 40th anniversary surrounded by family and friends, the ranch house overflowing with people who had come to honor the couple who had become something of a legend in the valley. Stories were told of Katherine's courage in facing down the town council, of Asher's loyalty in standing with her against the mob. The younger generation listened wide-eyed to tales that sounded almost like fairy tales, but were absolutely true, stories of injustice faced and overcome through love and determination. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Katherine found herself standing on the porch, looking out over the land they had made their own. The mountains stood eternal against the sky, their peaks catching the last light of the setting sun. Somewhere in the valley below, the town of Westcliffe was settling in for the night, children being tucked into beds, families gathering for evening meals, life continuing in its eternal patterns. Asher came to stand beside her, his hair silver now, but his green eyes still as sharp and kind as they had been the day they met. "What are you thinking about, Ishi? Moanamat, he asked, the same question he had asked her countless times over the decades. "About how everything comes full circle," Katherine said, "about how the worst day of my life led directly to the best days of my life, about how pain and injustice can be transformed into something beautiful if you are brave enough and lucky enough to have someone stand with you." "I would stand with you again," Asher said. "Today, tomorrow, for as long as we have left. I would ride out to find you, bring you back, face down the whole town all over again if that was what it took." "I know you would," Katherine said, taking his hand and lacing their fingers together. "That is why I love you. Not because you are perfect, but because you are good. Because when it mattered most, when I needed someone to believe in me, you were there. You stood with me, and you fought for me, and you loved me even when I was too hurt and angry to love myself." They stood together as night fell over the ranch. Two people who had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, whose love had been forged in adversity and proved unbreakable by time. Behind them, the house they had built together stood warm and welcoming, filled with memories of children raised and grandchildren spoiled and a life well lived. Before them, the mountains stood eternal and beautiful, witnesses to the love story that had unfolded in their shadow. And in that moment, Katherine Jensen Ross knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with. The girl who had been chased out of town with lies and stones had become a woman of strength and grace, beloved by her community and her family. The cowboy who had ridden out to bring her back had become her partner in every sense of the word, the other half of her heart and soul. Their story became part of the valley's history, told and retold to new generations as an example of courage and love triumphing over injustice. The schoolhouse where Katherine had taught bore a plaque with her name, honoring her contributions to education in the territory. The ranch where they had built their life became a landmark, known throughout the region for the quality of its horses and the warmth of its hospitality. When Katherine was 73 and Asher 76, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them and Molly and Daniel, who had become grandparents themselves and whose own marriage had weathered 5 decades with similar grace. They reminisced about the early days, laughing over memories of challenges faced and overcome, of children raised and grandchildren doted upon, of a life built together one day at a time. "Do you know what I remember most clearly?" Katherine asked as they sat by the fire that evening. "The moment I first saw you riding toward me on that road. I was so afraid, so hurt, so ready to just give up and disappear somewhere no one knew me. And then you appeared, and something in me recognized you even though we had never met. Something in me knew that you were going to change everything." "I felt the same way," Asher admitted. "I saw you standing there, bruised and defiant, refusing to be broken even though they had tried their best to break you, and I thought, that is a woman worth knowing. That is a woman worth fighting for." "Best decision you ever made," Molly interjected with a grin. "Both of you! Can you imagine what your lives would have been like if Asher had just ridden past that day, if Katherine had kept walking toward Denver?" "I try not to imagine it," Katherine said with a shudder. "It is too horrible to contemplate. This life, this family, everything we have built together, it all started because Asher had the courage to stop and help a stranger." "You were not a stranger for long," Asher said, pulling her close. "From the moment we met, it felt like coming home." They lived into their 80s, a gift in a time and place where life expectancy was often much shorter. Katherine passed first on a spring morning with Asher holding her hand, and all her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed. Her last words were of love and gratitude, thanking her family for the beautiful life they had given her, and telling Asher that she would be waiting for him on the other side of whatever came next. Asher followed her 6 months later, his heart simply giving out, as if it had decided there was no point in continuing without its other half. He died in his sleep peacefully, and those who found him said he had a smile on his face, as if he had woken to find Katherine waiting for him just as she had promised. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery outside Westcliffe, their graves overlooking the mountains they had loved and the valley where they had built their life together. The stone marker bore both their names and a simple inscription that Katherine had requested years before. They stood together. Their children and grandchildren continued the legacy they had built, teaching and healing and working the land with the same dedication and integrity that Katherine and Asher had modeled. The stories of how they met, of the injustice Katherine had faced, and the courage Asher had shown in standing with her, were passed down through the generations, becoming part of the family's foundational mythology. The schoolhouse bore Katherine's name, and scholarships were established in her honor to help bright students from poor families continue their education. The ranch continued to produce excellent horses, with Matthew and then his sons maintaining the high standards Asher had set. And in the town of Westcliffe, Q4, people still spoke of the teacher and the cowboy, of lies and stones, and the courage to stand against injustice, of a love that had been tested by fire and proved unbreakable. Their story became more than just a personal history. It became a reminder that standing up for what is right matters, that courage can come from unexpected places, that love and justice are worth fighting for no matter the cost. Young women facing discrimination took inspiration from Katherine's refusal to accept unjust treatment. Young men learned from Asher's example that true strength lies in standing with the vulnerable rather than joining the mob. The legacy of Katherine Jensen Ross and Asher Ross extended far beyond their own lives, touching generations they would never meet, inspiring courage they would never witness. And somewhere, if such things are possible, they stood together still, watching over the valley they had loved and the family they had created, forever young and forever in love, the teacher and the cowboy who had faced down a whole town and built a life that would endure long after they were gone. Their love story was complete, every chapter written, every challenge met, every promise kept. From the moment Asher rode out to bring Katherine back when everyone else had turned against her to their final days together surrounded by the family and community they had built, their lives had been a testament to the power of standing together against injustice and choosing love even when it would have been easier to choose indifference. The mountains stood eternal over their graves, the same peaks that had witnessed their first kiss and their wedding and all the moments of joy and sorrow that had filled the decades between. The valley continued its cycles of seasons, winter snows giving way to spring flowers, giving way to summer heat, giving way to autumn gold. And in the memories of those who had known them and the stories told by those who came after, Katherine and Asher lived on. Their love story a reminder that the best things in life are worth fighting for, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm and triumph over any injustice.